Good morning, good evening, good night. It's Trev and Gray back here on the Trekway. Thanks for coming along again, Gray. He's a busy
Sure.
man. He's got stuff on, but he made time for us as always. We're already episode 2 of Star
Yeah.
Trek: Strange New Worlds, um, and today we're doing season 2, episode 2. Interesting title: Ad Astra per Aspera. Now, say that 10 times quickly when you've had a few jars. I dare you. I had to say it a few times with Segre so I didn't make an arse of it, you know?
Yeah, I was wondering where it came from too. I mean, I've heard Ad Astra before, so I think it has some basis in Latin or whatever.
Don't spoil
Uh,
it. Don't spoil it yet
no, I'm
with the
not. I'm
definition
not.
yet. Safe to say that I won't spoil your score on it, but you did enjoy this episode.
Yep, very much.
I gave it slightly less of a mark than Graham. We'll get to why it wasn't a bad episode. Basically,
Hmm.
this is the episode that's covering Una Chin Riley number one's reprieve case he's going through with Starfleet at the moment for them finding out that she had augmentations due to who she is and who her species is. Should they have done this in the first episode, Gray? Or did you think maybe it wasn't a good idea to do that? It's common sense to do it in the first episode, usually. However, maybe it was good to just jump straight into the first episode and have something slightly lighter and nicer
Yeah,
before jumping into that. I think.
I think they probably wanted to start the first episode with action to drag in as many people right away as they could. So, but they laid the groundwork because they had Pike leave the ship, obviously to go help Una, and then they got
True,
into the story last week.
true. I like the way they done it, to be fair, because the first episode was
Hmm.
funny with Spock shitting himself being in charge of an Enterprise. The first time set up was
Hmm.
good. So this episode here, we start off with a young Una Chin Riley. Just call her number one. I prefer that. Start off a young number one. She seems to have some sort of injury on her. The area. Well, it's on her leg. The area that's kind of glowing. This kind of augmentation thing that they've got when something's up or something's wrong or something's not quite right. There's a kind of like glow to them. This area that's kind of injured on her is glowing. We find out later on why that was. Our parents are freaking out. They're trying to get her help, but they can't. They're like, maybe we shouldn't get her help because people will be up against us
No,
and
yeah.
they'll say things. And as we go into the episode, we find out kind of what's going on with their planet and what's right and wrong and that kind of stuff. So I don't want to spoil that, but I thought we'd start with a younger number one. Not surprised, and then we jump obviously to the present with a current Una, and she's been given a deal by Starfleet Grey.
Yep.
Now, this
Plea
is
bargaining.
a plea bargain, exactly. This we've seen this all throughout time, haven't we? And nothing will change in the future. Even Star Trek happens for real. Um,
Mm.
she's been given honourable dismissal, which is a deal that everyone's asking her to take, and something that she has been told is a great deal because you can actually spend a couple of years behind bars for this one or in a penal collar or whatnot. So and not have honourable dismissal. So, but in saying that, Una's counsel at the time, she told by counsel to take the deal, but then Una says, "Well, you would say that you're working for the establishment, so to speak." So it's kind of when
Yeah.
you can't afford a lawyer here, Gray, they offer one to you, but they're never going to be as good as
Right.
one that you've picked because who pays the man? So
Exactly. You get the
um,
up and coming lawyers that have only been a lawyer for a week.
you
Doesn't
do
work.
mention
Doesn't
here.
work real well.
You do mention here that she has no one to represent her at this time. So it does look bad. So no wonder she said no to it. Like not a chance. But I mean, obviously, the end of the first episode, Pike's gallivanting. It's pretty far away. I think it's certainly far away, or if not, the other side of the galaxy that he has to go and find help to represent
Mm.
Una, and he does. We see Pike, and Alec was interested in this. I want your thoughts on this, Greg, because we see a bit more. We see a part we had in the trailer for this episode. And by the way, the trailer reviews that we do, they're dropping them much later. Gray's mentioned this. I'm noticing this.
Yeah.
So it's more difficult to cover. Yeah, I could do a separate video just covering the trailer, but often it's not noteworthy enough to do a separate video. So that's the reason for that. But yeah, we've seen the trailer, Pike with the breathing apparatus on, struggling to breathe on, like, looks like a old ass city or planet. I honestly thought he was somewhere closer to home here, Gray, like Scotland, because it looked miserable outside.
It looked a little foggy and whatever.
Certainly wasn't Florida.
No. Apparently he's on Illyria, I guess, and all the Illyrians, of course, are used to the air or their atmosphere. They can breathe it without issues or anything. But it's deadly to humans, so he's like carrying this mask with a little oxygen tank on the side.
Yeah.
He looks like he's running out, as we see later. He is running out, but he's like,
he's running out big
poor
time
guy.
at one point, actually. Illyria, they're on Illyria. It's in the Volterran Nebula, this part of the galaxy. Pretty far away, that's why Pike needed 3 days to get there. And the person he wants to see is a lady called Councillor Nira Katul, right? Now, as we get to throughout this, she is shit hot at her job. We can see why Pike went after her. But she's not really interested in seeing him because he's one of the boys, the poster boys of Starfleet, and she doesn't really like Starfleet at all. This, but for kind of obvious reasons and reasons we get into, that things are not very fair and don't look upon augments very favourably in the Federation, blah, blah, blah. And she does not want to see him at all. And there's the lady in reception, the receptionist just be like, no, she's booked out. Pike's, I can wait here, no problem. Yeah, that's fine. Looking at his O2 meter and be like, oh shit, 2%. Goes down to 1% and then starts running out and he's starting to lose consciousness a bit. Which, okay, right, I'm not nitpicking. It doesn't happen that quickly. But hey, for dramatic effect, it worked. I'd laugh if he was just putting it on because she's like, all right, okay, Jesus, I'm going to get her, man. And then she puts like a force field type thing up and puts obviously oxygen into the room so he can breathe. Now, every planet we go to that's M-class, Grey, right? That might be classed as M-class, we don't know. Humans can breathe without too much of a problem, right? Or humanoids, right? This planet, they cannot. For once, I'm glad to see the roles reversed a little bit, where it's our guys not being able to fit into this planet very well. Now, we don't know the composition of this environment, the air, but we know that oxygen is not there because he's struggling to breathe. Whatever air is there, it's something that they've been able to, over generations, adapt to, and it's their augmentation that helps with that. So it's interesting to see that the shoe on the other foot is what I'm trying to say. And he is struggling, but they can breathe oxygen as well because Council's now got a chair in her office with Pike, hearing what he's got to say, and they're both breathing absolutely just fine. So, what was I saying there? Yeah, sorry. So at the start, she's having nothing to do with him, Great. She is playing the hard ass. She is not wanting to have anything to do with what he's saying. He has to work his Pike charm, safe to say, to get her to actually do something. But we both mentioned here that the actress that plays this lady, the counsellor, is shit hot right at the start. She's got balls of steel. You can tell that she's one of the best in her field, if not the best. And I guess we just love this character going through the episode, Gray, don't we?
Sure. They mentioned somewhere in the show, I don't remember where, that she was supposed to be one of the best civil rights attorneys in like the galaxy or whatever. So yeah, she knows her stuff. She's obviously, being Illyrian, she's an expert on, what has to deal with Illyrians and similar things.
Yeah. And she's clearly got I don't know if I want to use the words hatred because it seems too hardcore, but she certainly has a dislike for the Federation and particularly Starfleet because of the augmentation rules and policies they've got. And I don't blame her. I really don't blame her. They're getting on just fine in their planet there. Why should she go out her way to help, especially when it's a 3-day trip? But the councillor does, in the end, agree to help Una. And you've mentioned here, Gray, that Una pled not guilty, and Pike's main squeeze, he's bit in the side. Captain Mattel is the prosecutor along with that. Vulcan, who we'll cover later, Admiral Javis. I'm surprised that Mattel was involved in this, because I mean, maybe the relationship that she has on off with Pike is not really an official unknown thing, but anything to do, any link when you've got prosecution and defence, they want to cut any of that stuff out. So the fact that she's involved didn't seem very fair. We don't know why she's picked.
Yeah, I don't know whether people know that they're a thing or something like that, or to be honest with you, you're going to take a little poetic license because when you do have somebody, it adds more tension. So, and I guess she's apparently one of the best prosecutors or whatever Starfleet has, and so
is she though? Do we know that, or is that an assumption?
I think that's more of an assumption, but it seems to be a likely one for what seems to be going on.
Yeah.
So I mean, they had so for that, if that's the fact, then it just ended up that way, and that's just how it works.
The Vulcan, the Vulcan Admiral Javis, he is an arsehole, basically. That's me using a polite word for him. The reason being, a couple of times, one time that I haven't noted down because I didn't think it was noteworthy enough, but it's a kind of funny thing that he's sitting down speaking to Spock on.
Spock,
I think it's on Enterprise, but it might very well just be HQ. And it's a funny scene because two of them are sitting just very stern, kind of talking to each other.
Straight.
And they're like, some of the other crew are commenting, going, "What's going on here?" It's who's
Ortega was actively lip reading.
Yeah, she was impersonating.
She's lip reading on what they're saying. It was really interesting though, because she's lip reading and she's going like, "Yeah, that this is all just chummy stuff," and she's thinking that they're not really, there's no real tension going on. And then M'Benga all of a sudden corrects her and says, "You don't know a whole lot about Vulcans then." He says, "Right now, I can tell you right now," I said, "Spock hates
those guys hate each other." Yep,
right. Yep. So then it was almost like an unshaken hand bet that, who was going to be right. And then so Spock walks over to them and then just says, I wanted to apologize for the display that you had to go through." And to us, the display wasn't much of anything.
Yeah.
But to them and to Vulcans, it was a bad one, apparently.
It was amusing that more Vulcan amusement really on our behalf.
Yeah.
And that's obviously the first part of that guy, that Admiral, being a pain in the ass, because he's not. You'll see this from Vulcans a lot. Obviously, the lack of emotion can sometimes maybe look and make you feel like a bit of an arsehole by default. But you'll see guys like him in Star Trek history, past and present, future, that are just, they've got it against the establishment. Like, think Star Trek Enterprise. At the start, they didn't want us to go out into the galaxy, that kind of thing. The Vulcans at the very, very start were just very anti this and anti that. And you get guys like him, then you get guys like Spock. So that was a funny scene, but you'll see this Admiral come up later on being an arsehole as well. So, so Pike isn't a happy guy, because it turns out that instead of this plea deal that they had before, which was 2 years in the slammer, honourable dismissal, because she's rejected it, basically the brass are looking at this in more detail now, the top brass, and they want to make an example of her. That's what it feels like, Gray. They're now going to say a possible 20 years in a penal colony, which Tom Paris was in, if you remember. That's basically the slammer, but they make you work outside. So is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know. It's still 20 years locked up.
20 years in a penal colony is pretty bad.
Yeah, you've got to work instead of just sitting in your jails here. They have PlayStations and TVs and everything, man, and comfy beds, and you're just like, what? So yeah, maybe it does sound bad actually. And that's because she's been made an example of. She rejected the deal, so they're going to make an example of her now. It's interesting that Lan Sung is in this, and she thinks she can be of assistance, Gray, to the counsellor. She thinks because it was a good point. I thought this. Who ratted her out that she was an Allurian? Who ratted her out? I was thinking this as well. Lan's thinking this also. Who basically ratted her out, and she thinks she can get some information on this as to who done it, and then pass it on to the council. Were you wondering, like at the very start, like who ratted her out, who it could have been, or did you not?
Oh yeah, I was always somebody said something somewhere.
Oh yeah,
and I was thinking the same thing like you. So who did it? Who turned it over? What came? How did this come about? As we see in a little later in our review, things
what you
start
think.
clicking a little bit, and you
Yes.
kind of realize some things. But yeah, being the security officer she is, she wants to try to use whatever influence she has to try to get the information she thinks she needs to help her.
And she is a hard ass, Lan. You don't mess over, It turns out, actually, what she actually tries to do next is she goes to speak to Ahura on the bridge at Ahura's station, and she asks Ahura for the personal logs for number one. And obviously, Ahura straight away, red flag there, red alert went off in her head. He's like,
Sure.
I can't do this, per regulation, blah, 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 blah. It can only be done by the very, very top level of Starfleet. And in fact, it might have even been higher than that. It might have been right at the top of Federation. And it takes months to get. And she kind of alludes that, I kind of need it for number one's defense. And this is an order type thing. And she then goes, I'm sorry, I can't help you out. That's her commanding officer, Gray. That's the thing, right? Because that's a step above her. But you've got to know when it's right and wrong and when to say it. And Uhura, already at this young stage of her career, is already super confident in her ability. And she goes, no, I can't do that. I'm sorry. I have to kind of reject that order. That's wrong. And she hasn't taken off the bridge or anything. She just goes her own separate way, and Ahura's a bit shocked by that. So you mentioned here that it was nice to see Ahura standing up to her and doing the right thing, even though it might have been detrimental at the time.
Well, I think the writing was pretty good in this episode, and this is one of the things I liked, because a lot of times they'll actually do this, and she actually will give her the logs to make it, But this time they wrote it properly, that she can't just be doing things like that.
Yeah.
And so that was good. So it's almost like, oh, okay, she can't get the logs. Now what is she going to do? She has to go off and figure out something else. And I think she's getting frustrated, Leon, because she is running out of options or ideas of how to get this done.
Yep.
So it's starting to get her nutty.
And as Pike mentions later on, I don't think it's aspired to say as much. I think it's Pike mentions this, that you want to be able to rely on people to tell you when you're right or wrong, and have the balls to do it, because no one's perfect, and you need a strong second in command to keep you right. And you see many captains in Star Trek do the same. I think Kirk said it as well, you keep quoting regulations to me. He says that to Sabak in Star Trek 6 Undiscovered Country. You keep quoting regulations to me, keep me right, because I won't get everything right in my own head. So yeah, nice to see.
Yep.
I was going to call it the kangaroo court for a moment, because it seemed like that she was screwed, number one. I was going to write...
Stacked against her, huh?
Yeah, I was always going to write this down, but that's unfair to say so, Gray, because they were doing things officially and by the book. Nice cut, by the way. I like that. It's good. You get good taste there, Gray. Not available in a merch store yet, but you never know. It's possible. Gray will be my merch manager. So yeah, the court case begins. And as I probably thought from the start of the episode, Counselor Couture is given a really good count of herself. She's coming away with a cracking argument. doing her thing. Basically, playing it very smart. You have to think left field when you try and beat something this big. If you think of history and society, things have changed. Any rules, policies, major procedures that have changed have usually been because of things that have been approached in a different way or protests and whatnot. So he says basically it's similar to things that have happened in the past, such as gender reforms, racism, slavery, and how we got around rules and regulations like this. Rules and regulations are not guideposts, but kind of ideals to strive towards. They're not perfect. They're not.
Sure.
It can be broken slightly a little bit, and we'll get into that later on and what actually happens there. And it's a cracking point. I mean, it really, really, really is a cracking point. Even though it's not the direct issue that's going on, she makes it relevant to things that have happened before. And then she mentions, Gray, I like this one, General Order 1, which is what the Prime Directive is also known as. We call it the Prime Directive, but its more official name is General Order 1. And right. She asks, she wants to hear what General Order 1 is, and she's speaking to Admiral April at the time, first captain of the Enterprise. Right. And they're like, objection, what's this got to do with anything? And, abstained, let's hear what she's got to say, or what the Admiral's got to say. And he explains that, actually, no, the Council actually says, isn't it correct, Admiral, that this order means that no starship can ever interfere with the society of a planet? I would have just said a crew or something, not necessarily a starship, but anyway, a nitpick. And he agrees it's correct. But then, Gray, this is the thing, she goes on to start almost interrogating him, even though he's not directly done anything wrong, saying, is it not true, Admiral, on this occasion, on this stardate, on this planet, this situation, you and your crew broke the Prime Directive for this reason and that reason? And he's almost a bit like, and that's where they turn around and go,
she
wait
cited
a minute.
about, I think she cited 3 different times, according to record.
Yeah.
So she did her homework and said, well, 3 times, it looks like you stretch that old Prime Directive there. So, yeah. I mean, it was a good point. I'm glad she brought it up because you and I and many other Star Trek fans have always thought about that, because they have the Prime Directive and yet, there's episodes where they don't always adhere to it. And like they said in the course of this little interrogation, if you want to call it that it's the captain's, I don't know, prerogative or whatever to decide if it's something that's really bad, what could be done, maybe. But she brought it up for a good reason, to say, well, we're talking about something that a law that you wrote, but y'all just make it work for yourself.
Yeah. That's the polite way of putting it. It's true, Gray. It really is. What are rules and laws? They are, I said before, like guidelines and whatnot. They're a bit stronger than that. Of course they are. You strive towards them, but they can't be cast in stone because it's too rigid. Then you've got to be able to adapt and change, and that's why the Prime Directive, rightly or wrongly, sometimes has been broken or slightly bent, and that's why it came into place in the first place. We get it. You also mentioned here as well, it stretches the friendship between April and Pike, because April refuses to have a friendly drink with Pike and walks away from him afterwards. Now, what did you make of that? Because why would you think it was a stretched relationship? Because Pike hadn't done anything wrong. Do you think it's because he hadn't told April for those 4 months that everyone knew about number one?
I think that was part of it, and I also just think that maybe he wasn't blaming Pike, but he wasn't happy to be semi-interrogated, like that on the stand. And so it was all just pissing him off. I mean, I'm sure their friendship will cool off and it'll be fine. But you could tell he was pissed because he's not gonna turn down a drink with an old friend. But this time he just doesn't take it, and he walks right out like, whoa.
I think it's Synthahol, or was that a TNG thing? Were they still pissheads back then?
Synthahol's around, but it's kind of like I would just say,
is that what the vegans drink? Sorry to vegan drinkers out there.
It's like the bootlegger days. You have your Synthahol, and then you have the real stuff always hiding somewhere.
If you're high enough up, though, probably.
Yeah, exactly. Look, Scotty always found his stuff. Was it McCoy always found his stuff? I mean, these guys come up with it somewhere.
You think the crooks are the low guys? They're not. More often than not, they're the guys higher up because they can get away with it or they think they can. No, it is a very good point. They're having a drink. I like that scene right after because this is when they're taking a recess. They're both in Pike's quarters, and April walks in, and literally Pike's got 2 drinks. Let's assume it's whiskey, some nice Scotch whiskey, the best of gear, of course, and
Of course.
a wee nip each. And he's like, nah, I'm not having any of this stuff. You know, the interrogation not right. And after a moment or two, kind of walks and leaves out. Not storms out, but leaves out. He's not happy. So Pike's just like, there we go. I'll have a double nip then. I can't waste it.
Right after that little altercation, he's going like, yeah, I'm going to need
a double.
Now.
Yeah, it's basically Star Trek. Star Trek Judge Judy. You'd say that one there because it was literally a court case for a big chunk of this, you know.
I can just see him returning to the courtroom and you hear dun 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 dun. Dun.
On today's episode. Right after they're calling up the character witnesses as they do in these things. Your boy Spock and Benga, who's grown in me more. I see him actually. I'm loving this guy. I think it's part to do with the fact that now, unfortunately, his kind of daughter's moved on. Spoiler alert, she didn't necessarily die. Watch the last season. It's kind of freed him up and released him a little bit emotionally, so he's more on the ball, and he's a badass as well. Those two and Lan are on the witness stand saying very nice things about number one. Of course they are. Basically saying, I think Lan's saying, she saved my life, literally. I've got no family. She is my family. If it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be here today. The crew, the starship, none of it would be the same without her in place because she's done such a good job as the charge.
I like how Spock made a dramatic comment for some Vulcan humor, maybe. But they go like, they asked us as well, has Una ever kept a secret from you? And he goes, yes, she has. And then all of a sudden the room gets like real quiet, and he just goes, he says she admitted her love for Gilbert and Sullivan musicals, and everybody just goes like, oh, and there's like, yeah, that's cute.
It was good. It was. See, I like his humor. It's such a dry sense of humor. I love it. It's like mine.
Yeah.
And I think, tell me if I'm wrong, Gray. We never had direct confirmation that she was the distant relation to Kang, our main Kang from the original series. But she is. Or sorry, not Kang. Yeah, because it's Eugenic Wars. It started, he was in Deep Freeze for a while, then he came back in TOS.
Right.
She is related to him, however many generations that is. But we never knew that officially until now. I don't know why it took into the second season for us to know, but...
I think they said something about it in the first season, but they didn't really
briefly
belabor it. But in this particular instance, they
really
came out and said, yeah.
I can wait.
Where they brought up the whole thing.
I think they only asked that and mentioned that because, well, she's not directly augmented herself. She comes from that lineage, so who's to say that genes and stuff are not passed on? And they probably are, because she can hold their own. But she isn't directly an augment, so I think that's why it's okay. And she is relevant very much in this argument for what's happened in the past and why this is a problem. And as I mentioned here, of course, they all give a good account of number one. They're all friends and colleagues. But afterwards, Lan is a bit panicky because it turns out she thinks she might have accidentally ratted out number one. And this comes from Gray, a little rant she had in season 1 on a log she done. Basically, her friend hadn't told her for all these months and years that an augment, and she was a bit pissed off about it. And this was recorded. Yes, it was a private log, but then people can get hold of these things if they really want to, and she's concerned that it was her that done it. I thought this was the believable path at this stage, Gray, that generally she's maybe accidentally ratted out her friend and she may be responsible for putting her friend in jail.
I think, again, I think this is another example of really good writing, because what they do is they throw this in there to set you off the path. So you're not thinking about, anything but that. You're sitting there going like, oh yeah, that could be it. Yep. She did something. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. And they're totally spinning you so that you're not ready for what really happens, later in the episode.
Yes, it's a nice curveball. I don't like to see things coming. It's always
Mhm.
obvious when it's too apparent and too obvious, and it's not this time round, which is good. So the title of this episode, Ad Astra per Aspera, and it probably is Latin. You can tell me it sounds like. Comes apart now when Una is put on the stand to give her piece or 2 pence worth, and
Mhm.
she's asked why she wanted to join Starfleet, and she says Ad Astra per Aspera, which means to the stars through hardship. Now, this, I don't know if this is ever mentioned in Enterprise. Gray can't collaborate because he bloody gave up on it, didn't he? It was Starfleet's motto before the Federation was officially a thing, right? Because Starfleet
Right.
was a thing before the Federation was. Um, and she remembers this saying from way back, and that inspired her. She also said when she joined Starfleet 25 years ago, or before she joined Starfleet 25 years ago, because she'd been in, her age is probably, she probably ages slower because of her modifications. That I maybe get ahead of myself, but I think it's relevant at this stage here. She remembers a starship and her crew coming to visit her planet a long time ago, and she was a little girl, and
Mhm.
she was amazed by the different species from all these different planets working together, no bother. And I guess Ray, that little point or that aspect of the episode could give it a notch up 1 or 2 in the ratings alone. This is fundamentally why we love Star Trek, what it's about, what politicians in the world should actually be watching more bloody Star Trek so that we can actually figure, hey, this is how it should be. Let's all work together because it's not that difficult.
I think
Hey,
that's the reason why I like it a lot, Strange New Worlds. It's a throwback to the original and Next Generation because there were many episodes in both those series where they were able to wrap, things that are going on in the world today and put it into the theme of an episode that really means something.
yeah,
And they continue to do that, obviously, with this one.
yeah,
So it really was well done. And, excellent reasons for doing everything. So
yeah.
it's good.
Good writing. They've carried this on from Picard season 3, and I want to keep seeing this happening. Una's also talking at the same time about when she was a little girl, like things like I talked at the start of the episode about how her leg was injured and why. I'm thinking if she, why wasn't it healing? It was a simple leg break. It would normally get fixed in no time, but they couldn't take her to a normal doctor because things got so bad in her planet. Literally, half the planet had augments, and the other half had people who had get their augmentations removed because one of the conditions for the planet joining the Federation was, okay, we won't judge you on what you are, but this is our fundamentals, our ideals. You have to get no more augmentations required going forward. The people that have still got
Right.
them can keep them, but you don't give them to anyone else, and anyone that wants to be in Starfleet will have to have them removed. Is it harsh? Maybe, but it's a
Mhm.
deal that started dividing a planet basically, Grey. And you see this throughout society and history today.
Sure.
Still to this day, things getting separated because of the colour of the skin, who you like in a relationship,
Right.
that kind of stuff.
What people
So,
look like, apartheid, war, they all have excuses and laws to pass
I
that
mean,
make no sense.
I won't get in a separate rant with that, Grey, because that's a whole different bloody series altogether, a podcast. But for me, it struck a nerve because, while it doesn't
Sure.
affect me directly, I don't give a shit what anyone is. I don't care if they are a hermaphrodite with polka dots who identifies as a strawberry. I don't care. Anyone's entitled to their choice in life as long as it doesn't hurt or harm anyone else. Do you, you know? Um, and it's very relevant here in this episode of what Una's saying.
Yep.
And
Very.
she felt awful. Her friend at school got bullied. She stepped in, and this is how she gets the broken leg, and it's kind of horrendous actually a little bit. And she's getting asked, so why you still want to join like Starfleet or what? Why? But it's
Right
and
after going through all that.
it comes back to we see this crew working together. We know the ideals of the Federation, how good it can be. This is what we want to be part of.
Mhm.
Um, And you could say, great, why wouldn't you stop the augmentations, if that's you want to be part of the Federation? But the thing is, this is the government of a planet that chooses this. It's not often the people, as we often find out in today's society. And you mentioned here the reason they chose to keep doing this, her family, number one, is because it went against their custom and deeply rooted religious beliefs. And who are we to say what someone can believe in or not? You know?
Right.
So
And as we found out, their family willingly joined what they knew was supposedly unaugmented people, but they went and joined anyway. And they said many people did. So they had to hide the fact that of what they were and what they've done, what augmentations they did, because
yeah,
they were living amongst people that didn't have these things.
yeah,
And like she said, to fix her leg, they couldn't go just to any doctor would have revealed what was going on.
yeah.
So they had to find an Illyrian doctor somewhere on the slide that, what came in and helped. So it's
Yeah.
a lot to go through. It's a lot to live through. It's a lot of pressure on the parents and
And
et
where we've
cetera.
seen that before with abortions and things and having to go to doctors on the sly way back in the olden
Yep.
days. And I won't get deep into it just now. Gray knows himself, certain states in America have revoked that kind of right as well in a modern society. So it's kind of
Yeah.
nuts. This episode relates very much to
Yeah.
what's happened in the past and what's happening at the moment.
Definitely correlates to stuff going on,
Yeah, it's deep,
today.
man. It's deep, but we never want to turn this into a political thing because while I can do that, we'd be here for hours, and it's not really the
Right. Nah, not what
format for it.
we
We're not
do.
aiming at that. So yeah, she's very emotional to this. It's a very amazing acting from the actress. She done a brilliant job here. Stellar cast, stellar writing, basically in general.
Mhm.
We find out the truth, Gray. I didn't see this coming, mate.
Nope.
She gets asked. Well, first of all, she gets asked a couple of things. She does get asked how actually no, I won't jump the gun on this bit because it ruins it. But she does get asked basically who informed Starfleet of your augmentation, and she didn't say anything initially. Then she actually said herself, and I was like, "Whoa, hold the
Yeah,
hold the phone, what?"
I wasn't expecting that at all. She says, "Wait a
What?
minute, why would she turn in herself?"
Yeah, I don't get
And
that.
then as we see, she said, "Because I've been living this many years, living the lie, and I just couldn't take it anymore. I had to do it,
It
and
was
just whatever happens, happens."
it was too much, wasn't it?
Yep.
It's living it for that length of time. I thought it must have been the comments and stuff or accusations or stuff, because you don't just out of the blue do something like that. Something has to start triggering that or over a period of time. That's what's happened here with her. She felt better for admitting, and that was key, Gray. We find out this was
Sure.
key, her ratting herself out. I mentioned here the thing about girl, the starship come in
Mhm.
and all these people working together, and that got her fascination for the stars together. And Gray mentioned is here as well that it was an emotional scene, one of several that was actually done really, really well because her people were persecuted essentially and suffering, and they were, no doubt about it. Um,
Yep.
and Una's able to tell Nira what happened and why she left her because they were close friends. You could tell at the start there was some kind of beef between them, Gray, weren't you? We don't find out why until the end.
Yeah.
She's basically left one of her good friends alone. She chose to bugger off, didn't
Una
she?
earlier, Una wanted to explain to her what had happened, and I thought we were going to learn something, and then her friend just said, "Nah, I don't want to know about it." And then because Una was put on the stand, which was unusual, she gets put on the stand, and basically that gave her the outlet during the story she was telling to be able to tell, Nira why she left her as a friend, and then Nira
Yeah,
picked up on that, and then like, okay, now I understand.
yeah.
But her counsel, Nira's really got some. You could tell she's cooking up a plan, or at
Oh
least it
yeah,
seems she's cooking up a plan. So she was going somewhere with all this, which was good because putting Una on the stand was a dangerous thing to do. But they did it. She did it for a reason, and we see as the episode goes along.
it does work out for the best. Obviously, then it does go somewhere, but there is a small, medium-size spanner or wrench, as you call them in the states, I guess, thrown into the works. which was when Admiral Javis, the Vulcan, gets up and goes to ask. He takes a lead and goes up and asks Una a question, and he's saying we're playing off emotion here too much. Of course, say that he's a Vulcan, but we prefer to stick to logic here and facts. And he asks how long Captain Pike knew that
Right.
she was an augment, and
Valerian. Yeah.
how long. And he has to ask the question several times. She is very reluctant to actually say straight away because she doesn't want to rat out her friend. And I think she's got a thing for him as well, but that's a whole different. Anyway,
We'll see.
I hope so. And she doesn't want to rat out her friend, so she has to be truthful because she basically ratted herself out. So she got to keep up the trend of being truthful, and she does. She was like, it's been 4 months, and now it's like da da da. Everyone's watching on the view screen or the captain's quarter view screen back in Enterprise. Pike,
Right.
you can start to see him. Squeaky bum time. This is now potentially treason, Gray. That they both could be thrown away in the slammer, and treason
Conspiracy.
would get you probably a lot longer behind bars. Probably a lot longer or life. So I mentioned here that this guy's a real piece of work, but you're obviously saying he's not wrong in his logic, but are you giving him a break for being an arsehole?
No, what you have to have the opposing viewpoint, right? His job is to sit there and look at other things that are going on. And in a normal situation, and this is not quite normal, he actually would be right because if he knew about it that far in advance, that could be conspiracy. And now
Yeah,
you're in deep trouble.
deep doo doo.
And it looked like it was actually going that route, until Nira came up with some other stuff as we get into it.
Yeah, yeah. It's the reason I know he's just doing his job, but the reason I'm calling him an arsehole is because it wasn't just that one-off event. It was the thing between him and Spock before, where Spock's obviously
Sure.
not liking him and saying as much. So there's more evidence. We're talking about an evidence-based game here, Gray. The episode
Mhm.
that he is said arsehole. But yeah, so she's truthful. We're like, oh, here we go. However, the counselor is best at her job for a reason, and she pulls a master stroke here, a rabbit out the old proverbial hat. She gets Captain Patel, Pike's bit on the side, as we like to call her, to quote some regulations. She takes over the big Federation rulebook, and it's a big one, no surprises. Takes it over and asks the captain to read out certain parts of it. And I'd be like, why? But she's like, okay, right, I'll do that. Opens the book. I wonder what else was written in there, Gray. Probably because season 1 and 2 were shit all the way through it until those last pages. So she reads them out, and basically, to cut that part short, what she said was Una can basically claim asylum. Reason being, everything she's done, she's been persecuted. She's left the planet. She's asked to join the Starfleet, right? Her world has been looked after since. They've been on the up, and they're trying to improve themselves. She was honest about her situation. She went to the captain. The captain is allowed to grant asylum under these circumstances, and he did. So that lets him off. Lets him off scot-free, and it also lets her off scot-free because then it then goes to the tribunal, who are making up their minds and what's going on here. And great. First of all, you mentioned here brilliant writing because this was genius. It literally, how could you say no to that when you're going against your own rules if you say no to this?
Right. And I think her counsel was Nira was very good at what she did when she approached the tribunal. She was saying like, look, everything that was read out to you is perfect for what a person that is
Yeah,
asking for asylum. And I said, and essentially everything has been done that way. So how could you not sit there and say that she doesn't deserve asylum after knowing everything?
yeah, yeah.
And I think that worked to their favor. And then of course, the tribunal could have said something different, but
Yeah.
but pretty much they were stuck in a hard place, and they really kind of had to.
Step down a bit, yeah.
Right.
This is where the bit came from earlier on when I was talking about these are your rules, yes, but they shouldn't be stuck to exactly to the letter. Otherwise, you're going nowhere as a organization, as a society.
Sure.
You've got to be able to adapt to move on from these things. Otherwise, slavery would still be a thing, apartheid would still be a thing, all these things, you know. So
Right.
basically, after this cracking speech, Starfleet find her and Pike not guilty and grant her asylum. Perfect, right? That's a good way to do it.
Mhm.
However, they haven't, for the most part, changed their mind in augmentation for a good reason. What's happened in the past, they don't want that to happen again. It could change in the future. They'll look at that in the future, so at least they've been forward thinking in that. And we know it does. We know it does as of
Right.
season 1 or 2 of Picard. So it's a mixed bag here, Gray, because we said, what's the point of having rules in our organisation, big rules, important rules, if they can just be broken willy-nilly? And this is the odd exception that will allow things like this to go through without changing their fundamental policies, whether you or I agree with them or not. And we obviously find out that these policies need to advance and mature as they go through the decades and the centuries, and they do. So Starfleet have not changed their minds on it, but they're letting her off scot-free. What was your thoughts on that? You think that was the outcome the probable outcome we were going to get? I mean, they break canon otherwise,
Yeah.
wouldn't they? So
I wasn't expecting the how she handled the whole thing with the asylum. So that's how beautiful it was, because I was sitting there trying to figure out how's she getting around this one. What is she going to bring up that's going to prevent this? And quoting those regulations was perfect. Even
perfect.
later on, Una said to Nira, she says, "You had that whole thing planned. You knew what I was going to do when I went up there."
Pretty much.
She's gone like, you know,
And it's kind of sweet. Those two are friends, so they're actually starting to hold each other's hands, like kind of
yeah,
friendly kind of thing to do. They kind of made up there and understand, because it
yep,
was an apology from Una to the counselor throughout this trial as well. So it's
sure.
actually been more than just a trial. It's covered the friendship as well. Um, and Azuna comes back on board the Enterprise. Um, and with the counselor, the Enterprise crew literally give them both a big round of applause, which I'd never quite seen in Star Trek before. Actually, it was kind of nice and refreshing, and not
Yeah,
very
it's
Star
different.
Trekky. It was nice actually.
Hmm.
And you put here, Greg, that it was a great emotional scene because it shows how much the bridge crew love their commander and their friend.
Right.
And how does she acknowledge it? How does she acknowledge this?
It was funny because she acknowledged all that and she thought it was beautiful, and then she says, "Who's flying the ship?" She says, "Get back to work." And they all just go.
It was a nice way to end it. And then Pike, I thought, was going to be his usual kind of formal, cheeky, chappy self, but he pauses for a moment. Then he goes up and he just gives Una this big, awkward, emotional hug. And she just like, oh, okay, I didn't see that coming. That's nice. And then he kind of steps back. Kind of, nothing happened here, yeah. Very Vulcan-like of him. I liked that little bit at the end because they're clearly good friends as well as colleagues, and maybe
Sure.
more in the future. Who knows? I'm, I'm, I'm going for that one. And I mentioned here at the very end, Gray, good episode, nice, had to be done. Now let's get back to actual some Star Trekking for once. Now this is out the way, yeah. So, Gray, give your rating for the episode and why.
I go 9 out of 10, and the reason I did that was because you don't get uh too many episodes like this where you really got to put your thinking cap on and listen to what's going on. I mean, it's a court drama. So the whole thing was really mostly a court drama.
Yeah,
Now, some people don't like that stuff and they're tuning out, but if you really listen to the writing and how it goes, I thought it was brilliant, and it was nice to see something that was just totally different. And it's not without precedent. They did it in Menagerie Part 1 and 2 in the original series, and they also did it in another
yeah.
episode
That's where they were
in the
copying it from,
original
Gray.
series,
The,
Court Martial.
the badges and stuff and the suit and the uniforms were
Mhm.
very similar. Did you notice that?
Yeah, and really good episode where Kirk was up against Court Martial, and Spock was defending him, and another person. So that was another court scene thing.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think they also had one or two in Next Generation too. I just don't remember off
Oh,
the top of my head.
several of them with bloody
Yeah.
Q in the
So that
ringleader.
was I thought that was all. It was just really well done. Now, of course, if they were to do that every week, you get bored. But I mean, the point is that that's you mix it up. but it was good. It was tension. It showed the family, hooking up and together and supporting each other. So
Yeah.
good all the way around.
I gave it
Your rating?
an 8 out of 10, just slightly less. Not to say it was bad. It was a good episode. It was required. It was very well written. I'm never going to tune out because it's Star Trek. I'll just slate it afterwards and be honest. But not the same level of score as Grey, just because while it's required, there was nothing wrong with it per se. That's not usually my style of episode. But again, I'll go back to what I said before. It's required. It had to be done. We had to exonerate Una. We had to get her out of the potential slammer. So that's the only reason it's a slight downgrade. And only one shot of the Enterprise, one or two brief shots of the Enterprise. It sat there doing nothing. And it's kind of not done a hell of a lot, actually, since the start of the season. Been sitting there smoking a big Federation-sized cigar. But
I'll tell you another reason why that episode, besides the fact that it was a really good episode, it also accomplished one other thing that we don't always talk about. It was a very cheap episode to do.
And yeah,
there was almost no CGI, no action and other things that had to be worried about, sets that had to be destroyed, things like that. So it was like, we can make a really good episode, inexpensive, so we can spend more money on the other ones.
And they have to do that. They can't spend that level of money on heavy CGI episodes every episode because there's just not enough money for it. So they have to pick and choose when to have quieter ones. And this is the perfect time to do it. Unlike that episode, the first season, where they were all in like some medieval kingdom in their minds and all fighting each other. That wasn't relatively expensive to film, but it ended up being great because it was written really well. So if you're going to do that, write it well. That's all I ask. So it's great. It's done. Let's get back to actually some bold new adventures. Before we quickly go on to your little cool trivia callback, Gray, which is a good shout, by the way. Quick call to arms, of course. We are available across the networks here at Trekway on YouTube and any podcast platform you listen to as well. It's very much a Talking Heads type thing, so you could listen to us on the podcast as well. We're available on Twitter at the Trekway as well. Ray's got his own podcast as well, of course. We're taking a bit of a hiatus because summer and it's a bit quiet in the entertainment world, but we will be back within a week or two.
And the writer's strike.
The writer's strike.
And in a few days, the actor's strike.
Yeah, so Gray's Green Room is his one here, and it's the same. He's across all the platforms as well, and on the Twitters. And last but not least, not forgetting our friend and colleague Nick, who we do a gaming podcast with. We're equally as passionate about that as well as our other podcasts, and that's at Extreme PC UK on the YouTubes, on the Twitters. We're doing an episode tonight, so if you like gaming, come along to that by all means. But Greg, could you give us a cool trivia callback? Because I read this earlier on and I was happy with that.
I was kind of doing a little bit of research here and there, and I like when I'm able to find, these callbacks to other series that came before. And this little callback was interesting because Una mentions as the name of the episode, Ad Astra per Aspera, and it was the motto of Starfleet before the founding of the Federation. The insignia for Starfleet Command on both arm patches and flags on Star Trek Enterprise 2001 Star Trek Enterprise series consisted of a yellow arrowhead on a blue round star background, which was framed by a thick gray inner border and a thin red outer border. Inside the gray border, there were more white stars and the Latin words Ad Astra per Aspera.
Yes.
So direct callback to an old series, purposely done, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
And nice little tie-in.
That is perfect, great. It sums everything up perfectly. I knew I'd seen it somewhere before. And that actually slightly add to that, because I did watch all of Enterprise, was they were called the Makos. Just think of them as Royal Marine Commandos or Navy SEALs or something like that, right? They were literally there. They weren't supposed to be Starfleet. They were extra added level of security. They were closest thing to militaries you had back then, and they came with the Enterprise when things started getting a lot rougher. I think that was the Xindi arc when they went to kind of bust their asses. They brought a bunch of them along. They don't mess. They are hard hitting. They'll take you down. And I remember patches been on their arms a lot as well. There you go. That's where that's coming from. So that's a great callback, actually. But yeah, the good thing about this series is they don't take breaks in this one. unlike some of our other shows that we love, like Superman and Lois and whatnot, who just take hiatus for weeks on end. This will be back every single week until it finishes, and then we'll be back for episode 3 next week. So cheers for tuning in until then. We'll come back next week, and as always, put comments below on what you like and dislike. Like it or dislike the podcast, and thanks for doing your thing, Gray. Until then, though, guys, peeps, trekkers out there, all the best. See you later, and do your thing, Gray.
Live long and prosper, everybody.
Bye-bye.
See you next time.